I've been on a British Isles cruise on Regal Princess for 10 days now, and it's definitely not what I expected. Some ports were much more welcoming and enjoyable than others, and we spent much more time than I planned in transit to destination cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh, since the ship docks or tenders several miles away. On the ship, we had to downgrade her cabin to escape the noise and obstructed view of our mini-suite below the lido deck, but food and service continues to be impressive. Unfortunately, the ship feels like a retirement home most nights, and nightlife has been very disappointing. Stay tuned for highlights from days 4 to 10 of our British Isles cruise on Regal Princess. Hey cruisers, Andrew from Ottawa, Canada here. Welcome to the Chill Cruiser, where I review cruise ships from a chill perspective. It's day 23 of my 77-day European cruise adventure, and I'm 10 days into a British Isles cruise on Regal Princess. In my last update, I covered our first 2 ports of Cobh, Ireland and Holyhead, Wales. Since then, we've stopped in Belfast, Northern Ireland, where my friend and I spent most of the day at the amazing Game of Thrones studios just outside the city. More on that in a moment. We also got to visit 3 ports in beautiful Scotland: Glasgow, the Orkney Islands, and Edinburgh. What struck me now that we're in the home stretch of the cruise is just how different the experience has been at each port, how much time and effort it can take to get to the featured city of each port. Yesterday, we anchored off the small town of South Queensferry, which is 12 miles from Edinburgh. The tendering process took about a half hour each way. Then you could either wait 15 to 30 minutes for a 30 to 45 minute bus ride to the city, or walk 15 minutes and take a 20-minute train. We opted to take the train, which ended up being quite the hike to get to the station, and the train itself was packed. In the end, it took an hour and 15 minutes to get to Edinburgh, from the moment we boarded the tender boat. We were scheduled to be anchored for 12 hours, but that's a bit misleading since you had to be back to catch the last tender an hour before that. So if you add in all of the logistics, you really only have a few hours in the city to explore, and that's if you're first off the boat. And the whole time you're anxious because you've got the return journey in the back of your mind. This is where short excursions offer a huge advantage, since they give you priority access to tenders, and they take away the work of figuring out transportation and timing. But they come at a cost. You need a budget of several $100s per person per port to be able to afford them, which effectively doubles or even triples the cost of the vacation. I'll leave it there for now, but it's definitely food for thought as you consider whether cruising is the best way to explore the British Isles, especially since we noticed in Glasgow that we could have just taken a train right to Edinburgh. We're in Le Havre, France today, which they position as a gateway to Paris, but it's a 2-hour train or bus ride away, each way. After our experience in Edinburgh, my friend and I are staying local and plan on enjoying the sanctuary instead of rushing back and forth. Once the cruise is over and I've had time to reflect, I'll share some lessons and recommendations about the British Isles cruising experience. Before I share the highlights of our ports, let's talk about our experience on Regal Princess. We were in a nice mini suite which had a lot of space and a bathtub, but unfortunately was located under the lido deck and was extremely noisy. We could hear carts rolling, chairs screeching, and feet stomping. We could also hear our neighbors on both sides. Our view was also partially obstructed because of the massive overhang of the seawalk platform. This was definitely one of the most disappointing cabins I've experienced in all of my 40-plus cruises so far. The deck plan did note that it was an irregular balcony that couldn't be connected with the neighboring balcony, but it did not mention that there was a 100-foot overhang blocking close to half of your view. This is one of the many quirks of the Princess website that I cover in my video on the 10 things you need to know while planning a Princess cruise that I wish I paid more attention to. I went to guest services, and after a day of back and forth, they did offer to downgrade us to a regular balcony room with no public spaces above or below, which they said was the only cabin category available. It has a lot less space, but it's much brighter and quieter with a much better view, so my friend and I are much happier. Our experience offers a good reminder to pay attention to the deck plans before choosing your cabin. I trusted the agent who selected the room, but I'll never do that again. Never book a cabin under the lido deck, and I would not recommend booking a cabin underneath either side of the seawalk platforms, at least not on the higher decks like 10 and above. We're still enjoying the food on the ship though. We've had great meals in the Crown Grill, the steakhouse, and Sabatini's, the Italian restaurant. My friend was also beside himself happy yesterday with the sushi bar they had at the buffet for lunch. Where the ship has been very disappointing has been entertainment and nightlife. They didn't have a production show until day 8, which was Fiera, the show I've mentioned in my videos a couple of times, since it was the first show I ever saw on the Princess Cruise a decade ago. Unfortunately, Fiera has not aged well. As I expected, they've scaled it back in many areas. One area I wasn't expecting was the music. Hits like Born This Way by Lady Gaga have been replaced with generic, less well-known songs. I'm going to guess because they didn't want to pay to renew the music license. The singers were often off-key and almost screaming their songs, making their show very silly and often hard to watch. There were many moments where the cast ended a scene to awkward applause. They also eliminated the pyrotechnics at the end, so they've essentially stripped the show of most elements that made it exciting. They staged the second production show last night called Born to Dance, about dancers trying to make it in show business. After a slow start, I walked out, but my friend stayed behind and said it got better towards the end. I've also been let down by the lack of energy and fun in the piazza. There's been the usual game shows, movies, and trivia throughout the ship, but every time I walk through the piazza at night, it's a duo of some sort performing slow or light jazz songs, putting me to sleep. The party band has been coming on later than most other cruises I've been on, but their song choices are also usually pretty sleepy. Even though there's a very diverse demographic on board, it feels like they've designed the music programming for people 60 plus who are either already in bed or also not digging the music because even they're not dancing. The party band finally came alive last night with more crowd-pleasing music choices, so hopefully they've been given a nudge to play to a more diverse audience. Since my last update, we visited 4 ports in Northern Ireland and Scotland, starting with Belfast, where the ship docked in a cargo terminal, and you could pay $15 for a round-trip shuttle to the city center, which was about a 10-minute drive away. My friend is a huge Game of Thrones fan, so we spent most of the day at the Linden Mills Game of Thrones studio tour, which is where a third of the series was filmed. It's an incredible exhibit covering all aspects of bringing the show to life, from production design, costumes, to special effects and scoring. You also get several opportunities to pose in front of a green screen for some amazing souvenir photos and videos. Watch out for a future video where I'll walk you through the entire exhibit. This is definitely a must-see for Game of Thrones fans. We ended our visit at Belfast's beautiful City Hall to check out their fantastic exhibit that explores the history of the city. The next day, we docked in Greenock, which is a small city about 24 miles from Glasgow. We walked 10 minutes to a nearby ScotRail station, which is definitely the only train station I've ever visited that looks like it used to be a castle. After a 25-minute train ride, we were in beautiful Glasgow, where we explored the bustling city centre, including the Glasgow Cathedral. Our next port was South Queensferry, which is the small town I mentioned earlier, about 12 miles from Edinburgh. From the moment we left the train station, we were in awe of the many beautiful historic buildings everywhere in the old city. It did really feel like we were on a Harry Potter set. There was a major festival going on, so the city was packed, full of people, but we still enjoyed walking around and exploring sites like the castle and cathedral. I also had the best pizza of the trip at the restaurant for a Scottish brewery called Cold Town. I couldn't get over the endless options for comedy and theater shows. It felt like I was in New York City with all the posters and ads for the different shows that were on. Speaking of shows, I couldn't help but take a selfie in the beautiful quad for the University of Edinburgh, where half of the first episode of the Netflix drama One Day was filmed. I feel like we could have spent several days here, so a few hours in between a hectic train or bus ride was definitely not enough. This is a port where I would have loved the ship to stay overnight to offer more time. Our final port of Scotland was the pretty town of Kirkwall in the Orkney Islands. This is where I could feel a massive difference in how welcoming a port can be. There was a team of people welcoming visitors and answering questions. They also provided a free shuttle bus to drive guests to the town centre. This was a huge contrast to the last small town we visited, which was Holyhead, Wales, where there were no visitor information people or shuttle buses once we disembarked the tender boats, as if they could literally care less that close to 4,000 people were visiting their town. We were rushed out of a Holyhead bakery we visited because they were closing at 2 in the afternoon. Anyway, we enjoyed exploring the many charming shots of Kirkwall as well as the local church. This is where we discovered the existence of the Highland coo or cow that we didn't see in town, unfortunately, but it was prominently featured in all the souvenir shops. I was instantly obsessed and couldn't help but get this teddy coo complete with bagpipes and cap. We're in Le Havre today and Falmouth, England tomorrow, with the final production show scheduled for tomorrow night. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the highlights, as well as my full review of the ship and lessons learned cruising the British Isles. Speaking of lessons learned, if you're considering a Princess cruise, don't miss the 25 lessons I learned after 7 Princess cruises here. Thank you for watching, and happy cruising.